Okay, instead of talking about how to do things right, I'm going to talk about when everything goes wrong, what do you do? Disaster recovery. I spent about 5 years in the Middle East. I've been back for about a year. And so in the Middle East in general, but in particular in Dubai, there was this incredible building frenzy that occurred up until it came to an end at the end of 2008. And people were building buildings everywhere. And some had really good planning, and some had no planning at all. And some buildings, people ignored the advice of the lift consultants. So an average building might be 20 to 50 floors, and how many lifts you put in was, well, sort of whatever people felt like putting in. And they would build these buildings, and people were buying their flat or their office off of plans. They were not, the building wasn't there, and people would buy in, and maybe they would sell their particular flat might be sold 5 or 10 times before the building was built, and every time at a higher price. So, and everyone thought there was a bubble, but there were things like this on the side: keep calm, there is no bubble, it's all going to go wonderfully, it'll never come to an end. Well, it did come to an end. And here's a graph that shows what happened to the price of real estate, and it starts in 2004, and it kind of ends at 2008. So you can see that the prices went three times what they were. And then when the bubble burst, the price of real estate went in half. So if you were the last person to buy in there in 2007, you got wiped out. So all these buildings were half built, some were completed, and but they were never occupied, because who was going to move into these? Who was going to live in these buildings or work in these buildings? Well, all the buildings were occupied by the people building the next building, and so there were shortages in places to live. There were shortages in places to work, and then all of a sudden, when the bubble burst, everyone got sent home. People just drove to the airport and abandoned their car in the parking lot and got off. Because if you don't pay off a loan in Dubai, you go to jail, which is serious. People just would drive to the airport, abandon their car, and go home. And so the population went down. It went from being very difficult to drive to where there was no traffic on the roads. It was difficult to find a place to park, and all of a sudden you could park. It was an amazing change. And what kind of contributed to this were a Podium Design building. Now, what you see here, all of these buildings have a podium, which is they have a base below, and then you have a tower coming out of it. And so it doesn't matter how big the lot is, everybody wanted a 40, 50-story building on top of a podium. There's nothing inherently wrong with a podium design, but it's sort of the start of the disaster if you don't take into account proper lift design. So here's a drawing of, this is actually a building, I got it off the internet, it's from the US because it's in feet and inches, but you see there's 3 lift shafts, and there's you have car parking floors below the grade, below the ground level, and car parking above, and every car park is an entrance into the building. So you have multiple entrances, so you should only have one entrance, but and SIPSI Guide D says you should always separate car park from tower lifts. But this design here, everyone's going to drive in their Bentley, park, and go to their office and live in luxury. So this is an actual building. These buildings were not occupied. Some of them were built, or they were completed if they were close to being done. But there was no one to move in because everybody went home, and these buildings sat empty for a long time. And the problem with the building was undiscovered until the population started growing. What happened was you had the Arab Spring, and it was very unsafe to be in the Middle East except in Dubai. So if you had a lot of money and you were in Syria, you would move to Dubai and bring your money with you. And so you had this problem in Tunisia, you had the problem in Egypt, you had problems all over. So the population started growing in 2011. And by 2013, all of a sudden these buildings started getting full and the problems started appearing. Now, in this particular building, this is an actual building. We were called in and said, well, what can you do? I'm having traffic problems. So we said, okay, it has 51 stops. You can see it has 3 car parks below grade, and then it has car parks above grade. And there's like 10 different entrances into this building. You can walk in. And so how many lifts would you think this building had? Well, the SIPSI rule of thumb would be 17, 1 lift for every 3 floors. Well, this building, the installed lifts had a 3-car group, panoramic lifts, that served 51 floors, and they were 2.5 meters per second. Well, this was not all they had. But they had a second group, a 4-car group, 4 meters per second, that also served 51 floors. So they had, 7 lifts. So now, but it was worse than having 7 lifts. You have 7 lifts, 10 entrances, and they had a common lobby. So what did people do? They came in, they pushed the up button and the down button on the 3-car group, the up button and the down button on the 4-car group, and they waited. And then it was chaos, because what happened is people would come in, and the first door that opened, they'd jump in. It didn't matter what direction it was going, because once you got in the lift, you were going to someday get to your floor. And so they said, what can you do to help us? Oh, first of all, you need more lifts. 10 more lifts would solve all your problems. Okay? But so what we said was, well, okay, what if we split those 2 groups? Well, why don't you modernize? Why don't you have no money? Nobody has any money. This is a brand new building. So we're constrained. We could not make this a 7-car group. So we said, well, okay, what if we have the 3-car group that's slow, the panoramic lifts, serve the lower part of the building, and what if we have the 4-car group serve the upper part of the building, and that way you can't enter 2 calls on 2 different systems. And then we said, well, let's do something else. Let's do assigned parking. So we can minimize the number of entrances per group by splitting up the parking. So we assigned the lower floors actually serve the lower part of the building, and the upper floors of car park serve the upper part of the building. And so how did we do this? We just disconnected the push buttons in the hall, and we disconnected the push buttons in the car operating panels. So now you had 2 groups, and we asked for put in some signage. Let's say high rise and low rise. We did that, and it made a huge difference. The building all of a sudden became habitable, but the day will come when the building gets fully occupied. There's not going to be enough lifts. So we're just delaying the inevitable, but it actually worked. So this building is actually running, and they were lifts made by a multinational company, but they were installed by a distributor, and the distributor didn't really know what they were doing. There's no traffic analysis. Nobody would want to. Why would you want to even quote tender on a building like this, because you're going to run into trouble. So this was the first building. I had another building, and this building has 28 stops. You can see it has 3 floors of car parking below the lobby, just car parking on the lobby, and then you have 5 floors of parking above. So we have 9 entrances into the building. And again, if you go to SIPSI Guide D, it always says separate your car parking from your tower lifts, because when you add additional entrances, you add in amazing problems. So in all these cases, we use simulation to determine how to solve the problem. So we took a look at this and we said, okay, how many lifts are there? And the SIPSI Guide D would say, well, you need 9. In this case, the installed lifts were 6. And the six lifts served all 28 floors, and it had it was an Asian design system, so that when you push the button, the hall lantern would ring, and so it was a chaos. you'd enter you push the button, the bell would ring, and then 3 seconds, 10 seconds later, another bell would ring, because it kept reassigning, and it created a tremendous amount of confusion. So we said, well, what can we do? So we looked at everything, and the only thing we could say is you're going to have to add lifts for the car parking. You're going to have to separate this. So what we recommended was, first of all, let's modernize and put in destination dispatch. It'll give you some relief. Because the building was only 50% occupied, but was forecast to be 95% occupied in 2 years. So it was just going to get worse and worse and worse. So for the time being, let's modernize and put in destination dispatch, serving all the floors. And while we're doing that, let's add 2 lifts in the car park just to serve the car park. Then, when those lifts are done, we will only allow people to go up in the tower from the lobby. You'll have to go from your car parking level to the lobby, transfer to a tower lift, and then the building would work out pretty well. Not great, but pretty well. And so that was a solution we recommended there. And it's a building owned by a developer who is building lots of other buildings, and this is he's a single tenant. And what's even worse is the 6th floor is also like a canteen where everyone eats lunch. So you have this traffic where everyone's going to lunch at the 6th floor. There's also a prayer room on the 6th floor, so when it's time to pray, they go to the 6th floor. So you have this really strange traffic and just underlifted. So then we have another building. The first building we talked about, after we sort of solved their problem, they said, well, we have another building. It's just now going to open up. It's just now completed. A lot of these buildings were stopped, and then they got completed starting in 2013. And so these abandoned buildings, these mothballed buildings, people start finishing. Well, this building was just finished, and they said, well, we know we're going to have problems here. What are we going to do about it? So we said, okay, well, how many lifts do you have? Well, rule of thumb, they should have 8 lifts, assuming a single entrance. They had 5 lifts, a 5-car group serving 25 stops. And so we had to come up with a solution for them. What can we do? Well, we said, well, why don't we add some lifts for the car park? Well, no money. It's a brand new building, no money. We could modernize. Well, no money. So we looked at this, and actually, doing simulation, if you had all the people, instead of having 8 entrance levels, have 1 entrance level at the lobby, the building was just about right. You could make it work. You could make it work that way. So, but we said, well then, we don't need to, we could modernize, we could put in a better control system, but really, if you just use the conventional control system that you have now, you could make this work. First, they wanted us to look at the maintenance. They said, oh, this is a poorly maintained building. No, your problem isn't maintenance. Your problem is you don't have enough lifts. So we said, well, okay, let's add some lifts to the car park. No money, can't do that. So we came to what are we going to do to solve the problem? And the solution was valet parking. Okay, so if you put in valet parking where everybody comes into the lobby and the ground floor gets out of their car and somebody parks it, then the building would work. So that was the solution, was valet parking. Now, labor is very cheap in Dubai compared to cost of a lift. So they could afford to have people just park everybody's car, and that solved the problem in this building. So there are creative solutions to disasters, but it's a limited thing. It's once this building fully fills up, or if they eliminate valet parking, they're going to have trouble. And every one of these buildings will have a problem in the future. It just doesn't have a problem now. Or we delayed the onset of the disaster. So, questions?